Before they came, the earth was not perfect, but it was clean. There was hunger. There was struggle. There was death. But there was also something that would disappear the moment they arrived. There was innocence. What you are about to hear was written more than 2,000 years ago. It was copied by hand, buried in desert caves for nearly 2 millennia. And when it was finally found in 1947, in a clay jar at the edge of the Judean wilderness, it had been removed from every major Bible in existence for over 1,500 years. The question is not whether this happened. The question is why someone decided you should never know it did. This is the Book of Enoch. And this is the story of what came down from the sky and what they left behind. In the days of Jared, father of Enoch, keeper of the old lineage, the world was still learning what it meant to be human. Villages were small. Fires were shared. People prayed to something they could not see and trusted that something heard them. Then, one evening, the sky changed. It did not darken slowly the way it does before a storm. It tore, like cloth pulled apart by 2 hands moving in opposite directions. And through that tear came light. Not the warm light of sunrise. Cold light. Moving light. Light shaped like figures. 200 of them. Descending toward the summit of a mountain that jutted out at the edge of the known world. A mountain that would later be called Hermon. They called it that themselves, because it was there on that cold, windswept peak that they made their oath to each other. The Book of Enoch records it plainly. 200 beings of heaven, led by a commander named Semjaza, swore a mutual vow. A vow of no return. If I alone bear the guilt of this great sin, Semjaza said to the others, I am afraid you will not follow through. And so they all swore together. Every single one of them. They bound themselves to each other. And in doing so they unbound themselves from heaven. The people in the valley below did not know any of this. What they saw from a safe distance, from the rooftops of their homes, was radiance. Enormous winged beings. Glowing. Standing on the mountain like torches lit against the darkness. An old shepherd woman fell to her knees first. Then a young man. Then an entire village. They wept with gratitude. They believed their prayers had finally cracked open the gates of heaven. They believed these creatures had come to save them. One young woman, the records do not give her a name. Only her village climbed the lower slopes of the mountain the following morning. She brought bread. She brought flowers. She believed she was going to meet her God. Semjaza was there when she arrived. He looked at her the way a collector looks at something rare. He chose her. And she did not understand, not yet, that being chosen was the worst thing that could happen to her. The Watchers had not come for worship. They had come for daughters. The text of 1 Enoch 6 is precise about this. They saw the daughters of men. They desired them. They acted on that desire. And as the days passed, more women were drawn to the mountain, or taken from their homes. And the earth began to exhale a different kind of air. Something was shifting. Not in the sky. In the ground. As if the earth itself could feel what was coming. as if something deep in the soil knew that the seed being planted would not grow into wheat. It would grow into catastrophe. The moment they landed, Eden did not just gain visitors. It gained a wound that would never fully heal. They did not come empty-handed. That was the most dangerous part. The Watchers brought gifts. And for a time, a brief, glittering, poisonous time, the gifts felt like miracles. Semjaza, the commander, the one who had spoken the first oath on the mountain, began first. He taught enchantments. He taught the cutting and binding of roots, what we might now call herbalism, pharmacology, the ancient manipulation of plants for power. Sick children recovered. Old men stood straighter. Women who had lost pregnancies suddenly carried children to term. The villages celebrated. They called Semjaza a healer. They built fires in his honor. They did not ask what the price was, because there is always a price. Then came Azazel. If Semjaza was the commander, Azazel was the one who truly understood humanity and chose to corrupt it at the root. He went to the men. He sat with them in the dirt beside their tools, and he showed them what metal could do. Swords, knives, shields, breastplates. The Book of Enoch 8:1 records this directly. Azazel made known to men the metals of the earth and the art of working them. Before this, men had fought with stone and wood. Now they had steel. And within a generation, they forgot that they had ever not wanted to use it. The first war between two neighboring villages happened 3 years after Azazel began teaching. It lasted 4 days. It left 47 dead. The men who survived came home different. They sat at dinner tables with their children and could not remember how to be soft. The hands that had held iron could not unlearn the feeling. Azazel also went to the women. Not with weapons. With vanity. He revealed the art of the eyelids, the use of antimony, dark pigment pressed around the eye to make the gaze more powerful, more arresting. He showed them precious stones. He taught them the use of costly dyes. He revealed the beautifying arts in full. And what had been simple became complicated. What had been shared became weaponized. The village women who wore the new pigments were admired. The ones who did not were ashamed. Sisters stopped speaking. Friendships curdled into rivalry. Women who had walked together to the river every morning now walked in silence, watching each other sideways. Azazel had given them beauty. What he had taken in exchange was the ease they used to feel in each other's presence. Then came Armoros, who taught the breaking of spells. Barakichel, who taught astrology. Kakabio, who revealed the secrets of the constellations. Ezekiel showed them how to read the clouds. Each watcher brought a piece of heaven's forbidden archive. Each piece seemed like a gift. But knowledge without wisdom is not a gift. It is a time-release poison. Within one generation, the villages had medicine and war simultaneously. They had beauty and envy walking hand in hand.
I will end you.
They had the ability to read the stars and no moral compass to guide what they did with the information. An elder in one village, a man who had seen the Watchers arrive, who had watched his community transform, sat alone one evening outside his home. He looked at his hands. He was an herbalist. He had used the knowledge Semjaza taught him to heal hundreds of people. He had also used it to poison one man, a man who had wronged him. He sat with this fact the way you sit with a wound that does not bleed on the outside. The knowledge was not evil, he told himself. The knowledge was neutral. But that was a lie. Because the knowledge had not arrived neutral. It had arrived inside beings who had chosen desire over duty. And everything they touched carried that origin. Knowledge is not just information. It is the fingerprints of whoever handed it to you. And the Watchers had left their fingerprints on everything. The world did not fall apart overnight. It rotted. From the inside. The way fruit rots when left in the heat, invisible until the moment you reach for it and your hand goes straight through. But the gifts, as destructive as they were only the beginning. Because while the Watchers were teaching, something else was happening. Something the earth had no name for. Something that would make the wars and the vanity and the poison feel small. The children were being born. The women who had been chosen taken, in most cases carried their pregnancies in silence. The villages did not celebrate these births. They waited. And when the day came, the midwives arrived with hands that were steady, and left with hands that shook. Because the records that do survive describe what happened, not who she was. And what happened was something the human body was never designed to survive. The midwife who attended the birth later told those who would listen that she had run. Not because she was afraid of the child. Because she was afraid she would not be able to pretend that everything was fine. And she could not lie to that woman. The infant, if infant is the right word, was already larger than most children at 2 years old. Its cry did not sound like hunger. It sounded like accusation. The mother survived. But she did not recover. Not really. The Nephilim were not monsters in the way stories usually mean. They were not creatures of pure evil, born snarling and malevolent into a world they hated. They were something far more disturbing. They were confused. Half spirit, half flesh. Born into a world that had no category for them. Unable to fully feel what humans feel. Unable to fully be what angels are. And in that confusion, in that permanent in-between, something hardened. As they grew, the confusion curdled into hunger. Not metaphorical hunger. Literal, physical, insatiable hunger. Their bodies demanded more than the earth could provide. The livestock disappeared first. Entire herds, gone overnight. Farmers woke to empty fields and silent pens. Then the forests began to shrink. Trees stripped of fruit, bark gnawed from trunks, rivers forced from their natural paths by the sheer displacement of bodies moving through them. Then the Nephilim turned to each other. And then they turned to humanity. The Book of Enoch does not describe this gently. When the giants had consumed everything the earth could offer, they began to sin against birds, and beasts, and reptiles, and fish, and against one another. And they began to devour human flesh. And they drank the blood. Stop. Before we go further, consider what you just heard. Not as mythology. Not as allegory. As a report. Filed by beings who were there. Copied by hand. for 2,000 years, by people who believed it was too important to let disappear. And then deliberately buried for 15 more centuries. Someone made a decision that this information should not reach you. And for a very long time, that decision held. Now it hasn't. So keep listening. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that you are no longer the dominant creature on the land where you were born. Imagine looking at the horizon and seeing shapes that block the sky. Not clouds. Not mountains. Shapes that move. Shapes that breathe. Shapes that are walking toward your home. The villages built walls. They built them higher and higher, season after season, and it was never enough. Because you cannot build a wall tall enough to stop something that simply steps over it. Entire communities abandoned their land. They walked south, or east, or wherever they believed the Nephilim were not. But the Nephilim were everywhere. Their footsteps left craters in the earth. Rivers changed course around the places they chose to walk. The ground cracked under the weight of their resting bodies. A grandmother in one village began a tradition. She refused to give her grandchildren names until they reached the age of 5. Other grandmothers began doing the same. Then mothers. Then entire regions. The naming ceremony, which had once been the most joyful event in any family's calendar, became something performed in silence. Privately. As if speaking a child's name too loudly might attract the wrong kind of attention. This is what the Nephilim did to humanity. Not just the killing. The killing you can name and more. It is the other things. The way joy became quiet. The way celebration became cautious. The way hope became a thing people held carefully with 2 hands so it would not drop. The earth did not break under their weight all at once. It broke the way bones break under sustained pressure. Slowly. With a sound like something giving up. And underneath all of that, underneath the hunger and the ruin and the silence where laughter used to be, the watchers who had created these beings continued to walk the earth, watching what they had made. But not all of them had forgotten what they once were. Among the ruins they had built, one commander still remembered the moment before the oath. The moment when he could have said no. And hadn't. Among all the giants who walked the earth in that age, one name survived longer than all the others. Not because he was the most powerful. Because he was the most defiant. His name was Og, king of Bashan. Last of the Rephaim. Og was not simply large in the way that the other Nephilim were large. He was large in the way a statement is large. He was everything the Watchers' rebellion had been building toward, the full, terrible product of heaven's compromise. The Book of Deuteronomy records that his bed was made of iron. 9 cubits long. 4 cubits wide. A piece of furniture so enormous that it was preserved as a monument long after his death, displayed in Rabbah of the Ammonites for generations. As proof that what people remembered was not exaggerated. As proof that yes, he really was that real. Og did not worship anything. That was the distinction. The early giants had operated on something like instinct, hunger, territoriality, confusion. Og was different. Og had chosen. He had looked at the world, at the ruins the Nephilim had made of what was once beautiful, and he had decided that this was not a catastrophe. It was a kingdom. His kingdom. He built his throne from the bones of those who had tried to challenge him. He accepted tribute in the form of human lives. He stood at the entrance to temples that had once been built for prayer, and he did not kneel inside them. He stood at the door and laughed. The sound, people said, did not echo the way laughter should. It landed. It sat on your chest and stayed there. But even in this, even in Og's complete and total desecration of everything sacred, there was another story happening. A quieter one. A story about a being who had started all of this. Semjaza, the commander, the one who had spoken the oath first on the summit of Hermon. He stood one evening on a high place and he looked at what he had built. There were Nephilim in every direction. There was smoke rising from a dozen different places where villages had been burned. There was the sound of crying, a constant, ambient, human sound that had become so normal it had almost become silence. Semjaza looked at his hands. These were the same hands that had once moved through light, that had existed in a place where there was no blood, no ash, no crying that never stopped. He had left all of that. Willingly. He had looked at the daughters of men and decided that what they offered was worth more than what he had. And now he stood here, in a kingdom built on suffering, on a throne of rust and regret. He had traded eternity for this. He had traded the silence of heaven, a silence that was full, that was complete, that held everything, for the silence of a ruined world. A silence that was empty. The theological texts do not record Semjaza weeping, but they also do not record him laughing. And in that space between those two things, something very human lives. The recognition that you cannot undo a choice. That the oath you swore, the oath you convinced 200 others to swear alongside you, was made in a moment of wanting. And wanting is never a good reason to do something irreversible. High above all of this, beyond the reach of smoke and sound, the throne of God was silent. This silence is the part of the story that people read quickly. They assume it means absence. It does not. The silence of God in 1 Enoch is not the silence of someone who has left the room. It is the silence of someone who has seen enough, who has counted, who has decided, and who is waiting with the patience of eternity for the exact right moment to speak. What comes next, when that silence ends, is not gentle. There is a moment in every catastrophe when the noise becomes a frequency. Not louder, just constant. The way the ocean doesn't seem loud when you live beside it, until someone asks you why you never sleep deeply anymore. That is what the crying had become. The crying of children taken too soon. The crying of mothers who had given everything to something that did not know what love was. The crying of men who had returned from confronting the giants and had not returned whole. All of it, layer upon layer, rising. The Book of Enoch says it plainly. The souls of men cried out, and their cry reached the gates of heaven. 1 Enoch 9-1 4 of them turned and looked down. Michael, Uriel, Raphael, Gabriel, 4 archangels, standing at the edge of whatever it is that separates the divine from the broken, and they looked at the earth below them. They saw the blood. They saw the smoke. They said to each other, "The earth made without inhabitant cries the voice of their cryings up to the very gates of heaven." They did not look away. They brought the case before the Most High, not as a request, as a report, as the formal delivery of evidence that something irreversible had been done. And then before the verdict came, something unexpected happened. The watchers came to Enoch, not with threats, with a petition. These beings who had shaken the earth, whose offspring had devoured civilization, who had laughed at temples and built thrones from bones, they came to a man, a human man. And they asked him to write a letter to God on their behalf. A letter asking for forgiveness. A letter asking to come home. Enoch went to the waters of Dan and he wrote it. Every word they asked him to include. He prayed. He waited. And then came the vision. God answered. The answer was no. Not a soft no. Not a reluctant no. A final no. And Enoch, this man who had been asked by fallen angels to be their advocate, walked back to where they waited. And he delivered the refusal. Face to face. Think about what that moment required of him. To stand in front of beings who had caused inconceivable suffering. To tell them that mercy had been considered and denied. To watch what happens to the face of something immortal when it understands that it has run out of options. The punishment followed swiftly. Raphael was sent to Azazel. He was bound hand and foot, thrown into a place of darkness, a desert place the text calls Judean. A name that means, roughly, the cauldron of God. Jagged rocks were placed over him. Darkness was placed over him. No light. No sound. No mercy. And there he remains according to the text until the day of the great judgment. The other watcher Semjaza and his commanders received their own sentence. Bound in the valleys beneath the earth. Sealed. Waiting. For a reckoning they cannot escape. The Nephilim, those vast, hungry, suffering, confused beings who had never asked to be born into a world with no place for them, received a different sentence. Their bodies would be destroyed in the flood. But their spirits, the part of them that was not fully flesh, that could not simply dissolve back into the earth, what remained. 1 Enoch 15:11 describes them precisely. The spirits of the giants afflict, oppress, destroy, attack, do battle, and work destruction on the earth. They take no food, but nevertheless hunger and thirst. And they cause trouble. They became what we still call, thousands of years later, evil spirits. Wandering, homeless, neither in heaven nor at rest beneath the ground, permanently between, just as they had lived. Into the world that remained the broken, hollowed, weeping world one man walked with purpose. His name was Noah. And if you understand what you have just heard, if you understand the scale of what that man was being asked to outlast, then you understand something that the Sunday school version of his story never quite captures. Noah was not chosen because he was the most powerful man alive. He was chosen because, in a world where everything that could be corrupted had been corrupted, he was the last one still worth saving. So I want to ask you something. And I want you to answer honestly in the comments, right now, before you close this. If the Watchers had come to your village, if they had arrived with medicine for your sick children, with knowledge that could end your hunger, with beauty and starlight and the secrets of the earth, would you have said no? Or would you have done exactly what those villages did? Fallen to your knees and called it a miracle? There is no wrong answer. That is the point. The people who welcomed them were not foolish. They were human. And that, more than anything else in this story, is what should keep you up at night. This story did not begin with the flood. And it did not end with Enoch. There are texts still buried. Names still missing. Chapters that were removed, not lost, before you were born. If you wanted to keep reading what was hidden, subscribe. Because we are only at the beginning of what they decided you should never know.